Hi, everyone. Welcome. People who have joined us live, or maybe people who are listening in the future. My name is Blair. I'm the marketing and communications manager for Prison Yoga Project, and we are here today for Hari-kirtana. And the conversation is the heart of yoga, philosophy, policy, and social justice. I'm going to do a formal introduction of our guest, and then we're going to dive into the conversation today. We're also going to be starting with about a 10-minute meditation. Sometimes I won't upload this to the podcast, but I think it's actually going to be really integral for the conversation that we have today. So maybe if you're driving, the podcast is for a later time, or the meditation is for a later time, or you can just deepen your embodiment of wherever you are in this moment. But again, let's get into it. Hari-kirtana is the author of 2 books on yoga philosophy and a frequent speaker on the relevance of yoga's ancient wisdom to life in the modern world. He's been practicing devotional and other yogic disciplines for over 40 years. He has lived in yoga ashrams and spiritual communities, and he has an 800-hour yoga teacher training certification from the Jiva Mukti Yoga School. Everyone, please welcome Hari.
Thank you very much, Blair. And thank you, everyone, for being here. It's a wonderful treat for me to be able to share this time with you. We're going to begin with a guided meditation, so please find your comfortable seat. And once you have your comfortable seat, take a deep, deep inhale and a deep, deep exhale. And then one more. Press down into your sits bones to inhale your heart up. And let your shoulders melt down away from your ears as you exhale. Take a natural inhale. And if you like, let your eyelids drop down across your eyes as you exhale. Let your breath settle into its natural, even tempo. The duration of your effortless inhales matching the duration of your effortless exhales. And bring your awareness to the base of your spine. Feel your strong connection to the earth. Notice how stability and steadiness emanate from the base of your spine. And bring your awareness to the center of your lower abdomen. Feel the flow of your creative power. Notice how your potential for graceful movement emanates from the center of your lower abdomen. Bring your awareness to the center of your upper belly. Feel the power of your life force. Notice how vitality emanates from the center of your upper belly. Bring your awareness to the center of your chest. Feel your potential for giving and receiving love. And notice how kindness and compassion emanate from the center of your chest. Bring your awareness to the base of your throat. And become aware of your capacity for receptive listening. Notice how your sense of self-expression emanates from the base of your throat. Bring your awareness to the point just above and between your eyes. Become aware of your potential for for experiencing higher levels of consciousness. Notice how clarity emanates like a shining jewel from your third eye center. Bring your awareness to the very top of your head. Become aware of your ability to receive spiritual wisdom. Feel the light of transcendental knowledge radiating at the very top of your head. Feel the space that surrounds your body, curving all around your body. Feel how your body rests within the space that surrounds it. Become aware of the sound that's filling your ears. And as you listen, feel the contours of your ears. Notice the sensation of air and cloth in contact with your skin. Now pull your awareness through your skin into your body. Feel your muscles. Feel the strength of your body. Notice the buzz of your nervous system, the rush of your circulatory system. Pull your awareness even deeper into your body. Feel your beating heart. Feel the different organs within your body. Feel how your body is resting on your skeleton. How your skeleton supports the integrity of your body. Feel the energy that's moving through your body. And notice where the energy in your body is very vibrant, moving very freely, and where the energy feels still or quiet. Take note of the thoughts that have been occupying your mind as of late, any thought that comes to mind. Notice the feelings associated with those thoughts. And just look at them from a distance, as if they were being projected onto a movie screen. Take note of your sense of perception, your ability to see things and understand what you see. Notice your ability to distinguish one thing from another. Notice the level of joy that you are feeling in this place at this time simply by virtue of being, irrespective of any external circumstances in your life. Notice the distinction between all that you can observe and yourself, the observer. Notice how your awareness is different from all that you are aware of. Feel the space around your body. Feel your awareness radiating out from your body into the space that surrounds it. Bring your awareness to the tip of your nose and notice the sensation of air moving at the tip of your nose. Take a deep, deep inhale. A deep, deep exhale. And on your next inhale, gently open your eyes.
Just giving everyone a couple extra minutes, couple extra beats to come back into the room. Great body scan. Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
So our conversation today, I think it has a lot of duality, maybe even a non-dual perspective, and we'll get into that. Maybe we could start by defining, in this trauma-informed framework, in this trauma-informed way, making sure everyone has a shared understanding. So there might be a couple topics, words, definitions that we might dive into, and I would love for you to lead us off in defining a couple of these things, maybe even sectarian, non-sectarian, yogic philosophy, Hinduism. I'll give it to you to see where you want to start with that.
Well, let's start with duality and non-duality. The meditation is an exercise in acknowledging a duality, the distinction between everything that we are conscious of and ourselves, pure consciousness, the individual unit of consciousness that inhabits the body and experiences the body and everything in and outside the body through the agency of the senses. And yoga philosophy begins with this clear distinction, discernment, Sankhya yoga, the yoga of enumeration of elements. The most fundamental distinction being that distinction between consciousness and matter. The bodies that we inhabit are made of material elements, including the metaphysical elements of the mind, the intelligence, and the ego, the sense of identity that we have as a kind of conglomerate of the body and our psychology. And interestingly, the metaphysics of yoga categorize these elements as being in the realm of matter. So not only are we not the physical bodies made of solids, liquids, radiance, gases, and space, earth, water, fire, air, and ether in more traditional parlance, we are also not our psychology. We are the person who experiences the changes of the physical body and the fluctuations of the mind, or the mind stuff, chitta, in the Yoga Sutras, yoga chitta vritti nirodha. The chitti is the mind stuff or the field of psychology, which includes the ego and the intelligence, but is usually translated as the mind. So, interestingly, there is also non-duality in yoga philosophy insofar as our qualitative unity, which is to say we're all made of the same spiritual stuff. Brahman is the Sanskrit term for the spiritual substratum of reality and the substance of a person, or the substance of pure consciousness. And we're all made of that same stuff. So there's a qualitative unity and a quantitative difference. And this also applies to the theological aspect of yoga philosophy, the simultaneous oneness and difference between the energies, that is to say, the spiritual energy that is us, and the material energy that we experience in the world, and the source of that energy. Just like the sun and the sunshine are two different things, and yet You can't have one without the other. So there's a simultaneous oneness and difference. So similarly, the source of all being, of which we are a part, yoga philosophy tells us that we are eternal features of reality. And we are all infinitesimal parts of an infinite and complete whole. And our personhood as individuals is derived from the personal feature of that complete whole. So there's a unity on a qualitative level, and yet we are individuals, we're infinitesimal parts. We're not the complete whole, which is why I only have the experience of my consciousness and you only have the experience of your consciousness, and why scientists have a really hard time with consciousness, because you can't empirically observe it. And then the energy of this material world as well. It's clearly different. There's different stuff all over the place. And yet, on an absolute level, there is no distinction between the transformation, the transformed spiritual energy that makes up this material world, and the source of the energy. This is a paradox, and therefore this philosophical idea of simultaneous oneness and difference is usually preceded by the phrase inconceivable. In Sanskrit, achintya beta beta tattva, the truth, the inconceivable truth of simultaneous oneness and difference.
Well, I'm in my happy place. I don't know, whether you can see me or not, I am grinning and my eyes are welling with tears, already holding us in so much wisdom to create this shared understanding. When we are also a yoga community that is rooted in social activism. So we live within systems that we have created, or maybe people before us that have made these systems, and we are complicit within these systems, or we have a potential impact or a way to change these systems. Can we dive into yoga philosophy and how it can inform maybe our perspective, our interaction with these systems, or how to change and shift these systems?
Yes. Engaged yoga practice is supported by yoga philosophy itself, which provides us with a social structure that is designed for the upliftment of all beings. And we find this social structure spoken of in the Bhagavad Gita, one of the principal texts of yoga wisdom. Patanjali in his Yoga Sutra does not speak about this social organization, in part because the Yoga Sutras are codified instructions. They're like zip files, so you need to unpack them. And they are specific to the practice of dhyana yoga, the yoga of meditation. And while they do have social implications, they are primarily for people who are going to remove themselves from the world. The Bhagavad Gita includes the teachings that we find in the Yoga Sutras. The situation in which the Bhagavad Gita is spoken, however, is a political problem, a big political problem that has run out of solutions other than fighting. And the Gita, which instead of being coded instructions, appears to us in the form of poetic verses, is a conversation about what is the right way to respond to this situation. Arjuna, the warrior who is faced with a battle that he doesn't want to fight, really, he'd prefer just about any other solution, is thinking that maybe it would be better for him to leave the battlefield. And what we hear from Krishna, his charioteer, who is his very good friend and also is speaking from the position of the Supreme Being, offers the opinion, not the commandment, but the opinion that this would not be the right course of action for Arjuna, that he just has to deal with the cards he's been dealt, and his duty is to fight. And we have the experience that some things are worth fighting for. And Krishna makes an argument that this is worth fighting for, not because of what you will gain, but because of the principle that needs to be upheld in this particular instance. Fighting, therefore, is the right thing to do. This is one of the reasons a lot of yogis have a problem with the Bhagavad Gita, because here we have a supreme being in a personal form who says fighting is the right thing to do. And this is just red flags all over the place. So it requires a deeper dive into the conversation than just, this is some rationalization for religious motivated warfare. It's actually a call to action to engage with the world. And in the course of explaining to Arjuna what his duty is, Krishna speaks to where Arjuna sits in the natural social order. He's in the role of government, specifically the martial part of government that is tasked with protecting society. And in order to put that in context, Krishna describes 4 different fields of work that any occupation is going to fall in. For Arjuna, his slot is in governance, protection. The other 3 are the field of ideas, the world of the spiritually enlightened intellectual who provides guidance for society. Then Arjuna's field of work as the protector of society. Then the field of resource management that provides all the needs of a society. And then finally, the field of artistry, which provides the beauty and functionality of the world. And when that social structure is stacked properly, what you get is the head of society, the arms and chest of society, the belly of society, and the legs of society, a complete body in the right order. Unfortunately, our current social structure isn't like that. It's become discombobulated. So the first thing that yoga philosophy does insofar as guiding us in our engagement with the world is it shows us why things aren't working the way they're supposed to, because the social structure has become discombobulated. You've got resources, otherwise known as entrepreneurs, at the top of the social order, acting as the guides. That's not their job, because profit motive will undermine intellectual honesty. You've got government still in the same place, but their job has become to protect the interests of the entrepreneurs not the interests of everyone else, which is why there's always only a 30% chance of any legislation getting through Congress, no matter how popular or unpopular it is, because special interests actually control the agenda. And when you have this overlap between the entrepreneurs or the field of resources and the field of government, what you get is special interest policymaking and a formula for getting rich in the stock market, because now all you have to do is follow the trades of your local congressional representatives. That's not supposed to be how it works. Beneath that, you have the field of artistry, who have become transformed into worker consumers rather than valued members of the society that provide beauty and functionality in exchange for making sure all of their needs are taken care of. And at the very bottom, you get the field of ideas, which explains why public school, elementary school teachers get paid so little, because they should be at the top and they're at the bottom. So that's the first thing that yoga gives us from the standpoint of a philosophical engagement. It explains to us what's wrong on a very deep structural level, and then provides guidance as to what we should do in order to make sure we are rightly situated ourselves and move society back into a more proper, natural, functional structure.
I want to pull in one more thing, and then I also want to talk deeper about duty.
Mm-hmm.
And I would even say like sacred responsibility. As I remember, the Bhagavad Gita opens and they are in the field of war.
Mm-hmm.
And Arjuna is looking at his cousins and family members and people he loves across the field with him that he is supposed to fight. And I just want to bring that small piece of the story in because I think that might be so relevant to how people have felt maybe the past decade, of people that they love who think and feel so differently from them, or people who do feel aligned with violence or values that are different from them. So it feels that we are in a social war or a class war, all of these pieces. So that was one thing, if people on the call or people here with us today aren't also familiar with that, bringing in this like real tangible aspect of who Arjuna was going to be fighting. And then Krishna talks so much about duty, and I think I have a little bit of a thought on the Bhagavad Gita when it first came to me and was given by my history teacher of yoga. I always thought the timing of the Bhagavad Gita, the story coming out, was interesting, because what I was told is that so many people were fleeing to the mountains and to the forest to study. They really recognized how important spiritual practice was. And because so many people were fleeing, society was actually crumbling. We need people to keep society afloat. And then the Bhagavad Gita came, and you can obviously correct me if this is wrong, but the Bhagavad Gita came and spoke about duty, of how you don't have to leave to go to the mountains to fulfill sacred duty or sacred responsibility. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about duty and sacred responsibility.
Mm-hmm. So I'll take the first issue that you brought up first, which I think you are correct. A lot of us can relate to this situation that Krishna purposely pulls Arjuna's chariot into the center of the battlefield upon Arjuna's request, in a position that's right in front of the people Arjuna loves the most, who are fighting on the other side due to complicated political stuff that is beyond the scope of our conversation right now. But his grandfather, his martial arts teacher, his guru, people he really cares about, he's got to try and kill them. And they're going to try and kill him because that's what the situation has come to due to a whole long history of family intrigues and jealousies and stuff where all other options have been tried and failed. So the Bhagavad Gita is a great book to read just before you have to go home for Thanksgiving dinner. I had an uncle. He was very generous, very kind, very, very funny, and a totally unapologetic racist. And it was really hard to have a conversation with him when he would be so cavalier with his racism. And everybody else in the family was, you can't talk like that. And he had something funny to say about every comeback. So, meanwhile, he had so many good qualities. And at the same time, this one glaring flaw in his thinking and feeling, mostly in his thinking, because he had a huge heart. But just this attitude that none of us could figure out. And so, yeah, it's a real challenge. How do you balance that? Do you go to war with your relatives who voted against the very basic rights that you need to live in this world with any kind of peace? That may not be the best way to go. There may be other alternatives to engagement. It just really depends on what is your relationship and what kind of investment do you want to continue to make in the relationship. And this brings up a very important point about duty. Especially in the context of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna has a duty to fight. There's a way to study a yoga wisdom text in order to understand it or interpret it correctly, and to find out how to apply it in your own life. It's a science, and it's called hermeneutics. And one of the hermeneutics, so from the Greek god Hermes, the messenger god, so the science of hearing the message is hermeneutics. And one of the important hermeneutical principles is to be able to distinguish between an instruction that is universal, eternal, and transcontextual. In other words, something that's just absolutely true in all places, at all times, in all circumstances. And then an instruction that points to that which is eternally true, or that which is adjacent to what is eternally true, etc. And oftentimes, people interpret the Bhagavad Gita as, this is how you fight, but it's an internal battle between like your higher self and your lower self, or something along those lines, as if we're fighting all the time. The instruction to Arjuna to fight is not an eternal, universal, transcontextual instruction. It's specific to the circumstances. Krishna begins the Bhagavad Gita, instructional part of the Bhagavad Gita, by saying to Arjuna, you are grieving for what is unworthy of grief. The wise lament neither for those who have passed away or for those who have yet to pass. And then why no grieving? Because the soul, the Atma, is eternal. You cannot kill the person within the body. You can only slay the body. And once the body is slain, which is inevitable one way or another, the person within the body remains and transmigrates to another body after the death of the body they currently inhabit. So you're worried about killing people, you can't do it. You can only kill the body. And in this case, the cause that you are fighting for is just, and the circumstances of the Bhagavad Gita actually do correspond to what is known as just war theory. Therefore, you should fight. Don't grieve, fight. Now, one thing a reader of the Bhagavad Gita might not know is what happens after the battle. The Bhagavad Gita ends just as the battle is now about to begin. Spoiler alert, Arjuna agrees with Krishna and decides, yes, fighting is the right thing to do. And the battle itself takes place beyond the pages of the Bhagavad Gita. The story after the battle picks up in another book called the Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Srimad Bhagavatam. And what's the first thing that Krishna does in this book after the battle? He helps Arjuna grieve for all that has been lost. Because everything that Arjuna was worried about, insofar as what the collateral damage would be if this battle goes forward and if he fights in it, it all happens. It's not as if Krishna gives Arjuna a way to fight to get what he wants, which is for everyone to live happily ever after. Krishna tells Arjuna, you're right. All those bad things that you think are going to happen, they're going to happen. They're unavoidable. That's beyond your control. The right thing to do is to do your duty without attachment to the results, knowing that they are beyond your control. What's within your control is to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Our engagement with the process of doing the right thing is what matters. And acknowledging the reality that there's way, way more beyond our control than is within our control. That's part of the process of yoga. And it's how we do our duty, depending, which may vary according to our position and our circumstances, in any situation. So the Gita, in this sense, isn't a guidebook on how to fight. It's a guidebook of principles to know what is the best way for us to respond to the world that we're in and the situation that we have to deal with.
And I think the word that comes up for me for that is discernment. The practice of discernment. Because I think you could take the text or themes at face value, or some interpretations, right? Is that it's the internal war, or all of these pieces that, and I think that this speaks generally for potentially all spirituality, is that we might find something in a text or a teacher that gives us a reason or an excuse to make a decision, or it gives validity. We think it gives validity to a choice that we have. And with spiritual discernment, we're going in deeper. We're doing deeper listening. And so I'd love to just hear, your perspective on discernment.
The truth is not obliged to conform to our desires. And if we look to yoga wisdom to validate a course of action we've already decided that we want to take, the odds are we'll find that rationalization, we will find that validation, but it will be through an interpretation that has more to do with our desires than with what the text is actually saying. And we're all susceptible to this. So the discernment is also a matter of self-awareness. How am I looking for what I want as opposed to looking for what I need to hear, whether I like it or not?
Thank you. And I want to dive in a little deeper into some society, structure, policy. So we have our way of developing and referencing our internal world. And that might be within yogic philosophy, Tibetan Buddhist philosophy, Christianity. There is an internal framework that we have built that might also exist externally that we lean on, that we look to. But the United States is supposedly a separation of church and state. But we don't see that. Right? I don't think that we see that separation. I think that there's a lot of enmeshment that happens. So I'm so curious for you to continue to lead on this conversation of what does it look like to have a sacred duty or a sacred responsibility, and how do we show up for that in a way that creates new systems that allows everyone to flourish, that alleviates suffering for all beings. Long story short, how can we live yogic values? How can we have religion and beliefs and show up in a way that transcends religion?
So first, let's define what do we mean by religion.
Great.
The conventional understanding is that religion means a religion, a particular form of faith that is expressed through ritual, that defers to a particular scripture, that has a specific understanding of divinity and our relationship to divinity. So you have specifics about what is our relationship to divinity, what are the practices that help us to actualize or realize that relationship, and then what is your ultimate goal of your religious practice. These three things, knowledge of relationships, knowledge of practices, knowledge of the ultimate goal, are the three elements of knowledge in Vedantic yoga. And they apply even when you don't know they're there, they're there. Similarly, universal principles of religion, as opposed to a specific religion, are also there. And discernment means being able to recognize them in any faith form when you see them. Religion, in the Latin etymological root understanding, means to reconnect. So again, like repeat. Ligio, like a ligament or a ligature, to bind back. So if you break a bone, you need to bind the bone back to its source in order for it to heal. That's the function of religion. The function of religion is to reconnect us to the source of our being in order for our consciousness to heal. What are we healing from? We're healing from a bad case of a combination of insomnia, not insomnia, what am I talking about? Well, no, not insomnia. What is the word for this? I've just jumped right out of my head.
Well, it's like ignorance.
Ignorance, avidya, is forgetfulness of who we are. What is it when you forget your identity? What's the word I'm looking for? And thank you. Amnesia. Yes. So we have a bad case of amnesia. that is compounded by an illusion. We have forgotten our eternal spiritual identity. And we think I am this temporary material identity. So we've forgotten who we are. We think we're someone we're not. Now, if you met someone who had forgotten who they really were and were absolutely convinced that they were someone they were not, what would you call that person? You'd say they were insane.
Someone that needs a lot of help.
Yes, exactly. And the yoga wisdom literature that appears for us courtesy of self-realized yogis who have given us the information and the tools to recreate their own revelatory experience is meant to heal us, is meant to make us well spiritually once again. And that is the purpose of religion. The function of religion is to provide us with the means to have a religious experience. And there are wide varieties of religious experience. In the Bhagavad Gita, one of the things Krishna tells Arjuna is that however one approaches me, I reciprocate with them in precisely that way. And in the Yoga Sutras, we see that Patanjali goes out of his way to speak about the Supreme Being by using the term Ishvara. Ishvara literally means controller or lord of something. So you can be the Ishvara of whatever you're in control of. But Ishvara with a capital I means the supreme controller. And it is a philosophical, non-sectarian term for the Supreme Being. In the Yoga Sutras, it's not as if Patanjali says, you need to worship Vishnu, or you need to worship Shiva, or you need to worship any of the beings that may be accepted within the Hindu pantheon of gods as the Supreme Being. He doesn't do that. So yoga is not a religion. It is a technology for bringing about a religious experience in the practitioner that does not depend on any specific form of faith. And the Bhagavad Gita is a presentation of universal principles of religion as opposed to the specific doctrines of a particular form of faith. And the Sanskrit word for the universal principles of religion is dharma. And that is one of the definitions of dharma in the Vedantic understanding of the word.
Pulling in a couple themes that we've had here of duty and discernment. We live in a time that is often, I think, the correct term in Hinduism, Kali Yuga, a time of great, great suffering. So there's the 4 times, and we are in, is it the 3rd time right now?
No, 4th.
It is the 4th? It's the 4th? Okay. Kali Yuga, a time of great, great suffering. So what is our sacred responsibility? What is our duty right now? And how do we show up in the world during Kali Yuga?
That's a wonderful question. So yes, Kali Yuga, the iron age of quarrel and hypocrisy, the time of industrialization and environmental catastrophe therefrom, when people fight for no good reason and all of our leaders are liars. A formula for disaster. And this is something that relates to Dharma. People ask, what is my Dharma? How can I find my Dharma? What is Dharma in this particular unfortunate season of time for the human race? There are 4 principal pillars of Dharma. Austerity, meaning voluntary discomfort for the sake of personal growth. Purity, cleanliness of the body, of the mind, of our environment. Mercy, kindness, generosity for all beings. Compassion. And truthfulness, factuality, a shared conception of reality and living in alignment with the highest truth that we understand. So those are the 4 pillars of Dharma. And in the 4 seasons of time, according to the Puranic cycle of time, in the first cycle, Satya Yuga, all 4 of the pillars of Dharma are present in their fullness. In Treta Yuga, the reason it's called Treta, 3, is because 3 out of 4 are present. Dvarpa Yuga, 50%, only 2 out of 4. In Kali Yuga, the last leg, the last pillar of religious principles of Dharma is truthfulness. So first and foremost, upholding truthfulness, living according to the highest truth we understand, and factuality, dealing with actual facts as opposed to alternative facts, pushing back against this idea that you can just choose whatever information or idea or way of looking at things suits you according to your desires and say, that's as much of a fact as the other fact. That's a symptom of Kali Yuga. Pushing back against this idea of alternative facts and insisting on factuality, on a shared conception of reality, is the first duty, I think, of what we need to be doing in Kali Yuga. Factuality, I'm reading a really excellent book on freedom by Timothy Snyder, I think is the author's name. And he has elements of freedom in the sections of his book. And one of those elements is factuality, that we all have to have a shared sense of reality in order for us to be free. When we have a disjointed conception of reality, one part of society thinks reality is like this. And, the reason peace in the Middle East is so hard is because there are competing worldviews that are mutually incompatible. And if you have incompatible, irreconcilable worldviews, what's the basis for peace? So, standing up for the truth, first and foremost.
How do we work with the density of ignorance in this time? And ignorance from a philosophical understanding of that word, not ignorance like someone's an idiot.
Yes, good distinction to make.
Mm-hmm.
It's important from the standpoint of the world is full of idiots to remember that by definition, 50% or 49.9% of all the people in the world have below average intelligence. That's just a statistical fact. And then on the other side of the ledger, on the other side of that bell curve, there are people who have above average intelligence who realize they can take advantage of the people on the other side of the bell curve to fulfill their own selfish desires. This is part of the problem. So, how do we deal with the density of ignorance. According to yoga philosophy, the way to do that is by insisting on evidence. Pramana is the Sanskrit word that means correct knowledge. And there's a system. It's yoga's system of epistemology, the system of ascertaining what is worthy of reasonable belief. Not just what is a fact, but what is worthy of reasonable belief. And the system has three parts, each of which have their own subparts. The first part is hearing from an authoritative source of knowledge. And in yoga, that has the three parts of guru, shastra, sadhu. The teacher says, this is something worthy of belief. Now we go to yoga wisdom literature. Does the literature say the same thing as I just heard from my teacher? If yes, proceed. Your teacher has now passed the first check and balance. Have other teachers in history, other sadhus, other self-realized beings who have demonstrated the symptoms of self-realization, do they buy into the same idea? If yes, then the first element of pramana has been satisfied, authoritative testimony. And then we can move on to the next one, logic. Does it make sense? Logic has two components, soundness and completeness. Soundness means, does it have any internal contradictions? Is it chasing its tail? If no, proceed to completeness. Is it applicable in all relevant circumstances? If yes, then we have satisfied the second element of pramana, right knowledge, logic. We can move on to the third, direct perception. Does this conform to my lived experience? And this also has two components, depending on the circumstances. Does it validate what I'm experiencing right now? Or when I act on the basis of this instruction, do I get the predicted result? In other words, yoga is a science. There's a theory and there's experiment that you can do to test the theory. You do the experiment, it validates the theory, boom. Now, direct perception has been satisfied. You have to satisfy all of that in order to arrive at right knowledge, or that which is worthy of reasonable belief. And when you speak to people, if you have to speak to them, and engagement in some cases either unavoidable or advised, and they say something that you think is just some wackadoodle conspiracy nut job thing, or some way of looking at the world that doesn't seem worthy of reasonable belief, then you can ask, where's the evidence? I had such a conversation with someone just a few months ago about a particular person who people who subscribe to a lot of what I dismiss as conspiracy theories revile. And they were telling me what a horrible person they were and how motivated they were by this ulterior motive or that ulterior motive. And there had just been congressional hearings with this person. And I said, you know, there's a bunch of Republicans on a subcommittee who absolutely hate this guy, who would have loved to have shown the world the evidence that what you're saying is true, but they didn't come up with any. Do you know something that congressional investigative committees do not know? And the answer was no. However, this did not make any difference whatsoever in what they thought or how they felt, because it just does not matter. Facts do not matter. If you are really, really clinging to a belief and you're determined to cling to how you feel instead of what the evidence says, then there's really not much that can be done. And that's when you have to let it go. That's when detachment from the results of your actions comes into play for the yogi. I cannot control how this person thinks, how this person feels, We've done the evidence thing. The end.
Sharing on your piece of the 50-50, or the 49% of people that have lower intelligence, I think that there's a couple pieces to that. One, I think it's by design.
Mm-hmm.
That is by a construct. We live in a capitalist society that only cares to educate people to become workers, not self-thinkers, not philosophical, not in ways to enhance community. So there are reasons why people have a perception or a lack of understanding of the world, right? There are real symptoms for that. And then I think that it also speaks to the times in which we are in, from a yogic, religious understanding of the deep, deep ignorance that we have right now, and the being asleep to our inherent nature, being asleep to what it is that we are. So I just wanted to speak to that. We've got a couple really interesting questions coming in.
Let me quickly respond to what you just said.
100%.
There's quantity of intelligence. There's also quality of intelligence. And Krishna speaks to quality of intelligence in the Bhagavad Gita, but not really very much in terms of quantity. When we are influenced by lower modes of nature, there are three qualities of material nature: darkness, passion, and illumination. And in Kali Yuga, most of us, unfortunately, are influenced by the lower modes of passion and darkness. And therefore, our intelligence suffers accordingly. Then, from a systems standpoint, we do not educate people to find their dharma, to find their essential nature in this life. And therefore, people don't find a way to be in the world and work in a proper occupation that gives them actual satisfaction according to just how they are. So, yes, unfortunately, a few different symptoms of Kali Yuga that conspire against happiness in this world.
Thank you. We'll start with this deep one. Andy asks, does objective truth exist? Is there free will? If I am called and I answer, my duty isn't a choice. That makes me run towards it. Andy, I'm sure we could have so many satsangs about this, but yeah, Hari, on first
And you've got a whole workshop there.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, that covered quite a bit. So run that by me again, one at a time.
Yeah. Does objective truth exist?
Yes.
Is there free will?
It's called absolute truth in yoga philosophy.
Thank you. Thank you for the pointing. Is there free will?
Yes.
If I am called and I answer, my duty isn't a choice.
Yes, it is. You chose to answer. That is your free will.
And then the next piece was, that makes me run towards it. I'm wondering if it's like, if there's the call and it makes me run towards it, is there actually a choice?
The call, if it's not as if this is the sirens singing to you so you bash your boat against the rocks. It's you get the call, you get the invitation, and then you RSVP of your own volition. It's up to you to accept the invitation or reject it, to respond or not. So no, there is no compulsion in yoga philosophy, even in its theological aspect. Krishna never gives a commandment in the Bhagavad Gita. He gives his opinion. That is the actual Sanskrit word. My opinion is this. So yeah, if you have free will, then answering the call is voluntary.
Thank you. Thank you for expanding our minds and our thinking. Can you speak about empathy in light of pursuing a life of dharma and principles and the ability to sustain this path.
Okay. Hi, Julianne. Thank you for being here. Empathy in light of pursuing a life of dharma. One of the other elements of freedom is solidarity. And Krishna expresses his solidarity by showing up. I mean, what more solidarity could you ask for? He shows up to be with his friend at the moment of most intense crisis in his life. He exhibits empathy. And he also says that the reason he shows up is not just out of love for his friend, his devotee, but to reestablish dharma when dharma recedes. So if the person who is speaking from the position of the supreme being shows up on the battlefield to be with his friend in the course of restoring dharma, then that is modeling empathy. That is modeling solidarity. So we are limited beings. You know, we can sympathize with people who are going through things that are beyond our ability to fully experience. You know, there are so many ways that I, in my current embodiment, am limited insofar as what I can really feel about somebody else's experience. It's just in the words of Clint Eastwood, the great sage Clint Eastwood, a man has got to know his limitations. I forgot which movie that was in, but it stuck, and it's true. So on the one hand, we have to know our limitations and not be performative or false about it. But we do want to exercise the empathy muscle as much as possible and stand in solidarity with those who are experiencing the absence of dharma in their lives, insofar as how the system in Kali Yuga is treating them. Julianne, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Elisa asks, can we address our collective and individual practice of judgment, separation lens, and general fault-finding culture in living today, and how this perpetuates our non-awakened or our non-enlightened state? So I'm thinking it's feeling like the culture of critique or the culture of judgment and fault-finding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So this comes, this is a worthy issue of discussion. The idea of judgment comes up a lot in yoga culture, both for ourselves when we practice, say, mindfulness meditation, or when we are engaging with others. And I think it's important to make a distinction, discernment, once again, between using good judgment and being judgmental. Being judgmental is an attitude that undermines empathy, coming back to Julianne's question, whereas using good judgment is the function of discernment and choosing a course of action based on the best judgment we are able to exercise. So, collective practice, we contribute individually to the collective to the extent that we can individually abstain from fault finding and having a judgmental attitude, even in little things. Then to that extent, we are able to contribute to the collective and calling it out when we see it. If you see something, do something. Don't just, or maybe saying something is doing something, depending on the circumstances, but call it out when we see it. And this is standing up for truthfulness. Call it what it is. Fault finding without compassion.
There's a couple things I think that come up for me just to kind of riff. I think two kind of main things come up for me is one is just, this is the chatter of ignorance, of separation. And then there's also what comes to me as a survival mechanism that I think pops up for people that we identify as thoughts. But it's like, oh, this person is different from me, or this person creates a threat because they are different, or whatever these kind of the chain link of thoughts that arise when a judgment arises. From a place of self-protection that is an old programming, we'll say, right? When we used to be communities of 150 people or beings or animals, right? What is it that is both ignorance and a false protection mechanism that continues to arise? Because we can have, right, when we observe our practice, we can have thoughts, but it's about not identifying with the thoughts. And I'll give it back to you.
Developing the habit of stepping back from our thoughts as the observer of our thoughts, coming all the way back to the meditation we did at the beginning, is part of the ongoing off your mat practice of yoga. Noticing when those thoughts arise, being able to observe them without judgment, and then asking yourself, is this true? There are plenty of stories we tell ourselves that undermine our attempts to make spiritual progress. And we have to just ask ourselves, well, is it true? Is the story I'm telling myself true? And if it's not, then why am I acting on that? Why am I buying into that? So that is part of svadhyaya, developing that inner reflective consciousness. There's more to svadhyaya than that, but that's an important component, to get into the habit of being reflective about our own thoughts and the stories that we tell ourselves, and then asking that question, is it true? Is it necessary? And then adjusting accordingly. I have a friend who I've known since high school. He was a guy you never would have guessed would have become a self-reflective person and a good parent. Like, no way. But he did. And one of the ways he did that was by developing this reflective habit. Even though he himself is not a yoga practitioner, he developed the habit whenever his children were making him crazy, he would ask himself, what would my parents have done in this situation? And then he consciously, proactively did exactly the opposite thing. I have always admired him for having been able to develop this ability, given the circumstances that very easily could have conditioned him into reacting in a very different way.
What our practice allows us to do, right? To create the spaciousness to have that choice, to not be reactive. We're almost at time. I've got these kind of questions that will be placed. Lots of people asking about classes and courses and how they can deepen your practice, and we'll get there, and I'm so excited. Okay, how can we integrate the principles of bhakti yoga into our daily lives to cultivate a deeper sense of connection and purpose, especially in the face of modern distractions?
Well, there we would have to begin with definition, what do we mean by bhakti yoga? And different schools of thought treat bhakti yoga differently. Now, I subscribe to a particular school of bhakti yoga that thinks of bhakti or devotional service as both a means to an end and an end in and of itself, as opposed to a means to an end. In other words, you have a conception of Ishvara, your Ishta Devata, and you worship or meditate on your Ishta Devata as a meditational prop that's meant to take you beyond that Ishta Devata into Brahman, the undifferentiated oneness of being, another way to think about Brahman. I prioritize the personal form of Bhagavan, Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, because that, first of all, just makes more sense to me when I put the whole philosophy through the system of Praman. That's like, okay, reasonable belief. There's actually a personal aspect to the absolute truth, objective reality. And because that personal feature is the one that facilitates a relationship of love, and service motivated by love is the highest happiness that we can experience, that's what's known as our Sanatana Dharma, our eternal essential nature. Then by thinking in terms of how is what I am doing connected to service to the supreme person of whom I am eternally a part and with whom I have an eternal relationship, that's how I go through the day-to-day of integrating bhakti into my practice. And this allows me to think of people in a different way, including all the people that I think are really, really, really evil. Because I think here's a person with amnesia. They've forgotten who they are. They think they're someone they're not. And due to this kind of pneumopathology, this diseased condition of their consciousness, they're engaged in activities that are going to bring back reactions that will cause them tremendous, immeasurable amount of suffering. And therefore, I can still have compassion for them and remember that the person who lives in my heart as universal consciousness locally situated within me is also the same person situated in their heart and on a spiritual level loves that person and as much as they love me, and is sad for what they're doing and what it is going to mean to them in the future. So that's how I do it. And that, because that's my conception of bhakti. So I hope that is useful or helpful to whoever asked that question and whatever your conception of bhakti is.
Thank you. And continuing with your perspective and what you offer to the community, how can we find you? What do you have going on next? Workshops, communities. I think that people are really inspired sitting here with you today, which I was also hoping would be the intention and the outcome. Yeah. Because I have been inspired, our organization has been inspired. So how can people find you? How can people study with you?
You can find me on my website, Hari-kirtana.com. You can also find me on Instagram. I will be, and I've been speaking from the Bhagavad Gita a lot today. I have my book, Journey into the Bhagavad Gita, and a free sample chapter is available to all of you. And that link will show up for you here and in the show notes if you're watching after the fact. From a time perspective, in February, I will be offering a short course on the fundamentals of yoga philosophy. That's a 3-part series of 90-minute classes that you can find on the events page on my website. Almost the entire year of workshops and courses are listed. I have a few coming up. One called Finding Your Dharma that I will be offering in March, and my Bhagavad Gita full-blown course will return in the fall.
This has been so fantastic. Thank you for carving out the time to be with us in our community. I can feel already how potent and valuable this conversation has been. I know there's so many other things that we could dive into and talk about, but I want to give the mic to you. Is there anything that's on your heart or in your mind that we didn't speak to today, or anything that you want to leave our community with?
Well, I'm very, very grateful for the invitation that you extended to me to speak with you and to be with everyone here today. I'm glad I had the good judgment to use my free will to RSVP to your invitation. That's it. Thank you so much.
Hari, thank you so much. Thank you to our community. Please visit his website, Instagram, sign up for workshops. Maybe we'll even do a little book study here as well. We've invited Hari into our 200-hour yoga teacher training as well to be a guest lecturer and to speak deeper on themes of the Bhagavad Gita. I think there might be a couple future students or current students. They started yesterday, so
it'd be wonderful.
The opportunity.
I'm really looking forward to that. And of course, you can also support your local bookstore by ordering my book through bookshelf or bookshop.org.
Great shout out. Thank you, Hari. Thank you to our community. We love you. Continuing to deepen our communal collective practice together, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.